1 hour before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my fiancé's entire family cornered me in the bridal suite with baseball bats, laughing like they'd already won. They had no idea I wasn't the helpless small-town girl they thought I was, and that one phone call would destroy everything they'd ever built. My name is Celeste Romano, and for the past 2 years, everyone believed I was just a sweet kindergarten teacher from rural Montana who got incredibly lucky. Lucky enough to catch the eye of Donovan Blackthorne at a charity event. Lucky enough to be swept off my feet by a charming investment banker worth millions. Lucky enough to marry into one of America's oldest money families. But luck had nothing to do with it. The Blackthorne estate stretched across 40 acres of prime Hampton real estate, with manicured gardens that probably cost more than most people's houses. 300 guests were already seated in white chairs on the south lawn, waiting for what they thought would be the wedding of the century. The society pages had been buzzing about it for months. Poor little schoolteacher marries into American royalty. A real-life Cinderella story. Standing in that bridal suite wearing a dress that cost more than I used to make in 6 months of teaching, I looked exactly like what they expected me to be, nervous bride, overwhelmed by the grandeur, grateful for the opportunity to join their world. My hands were supposed to be shaking from wedding jitters. My voice was supposed to tremble when I spoke to the intimidating Blackthorne matriarch, Vivian. What they didn't know was that my grandmother Nora didn't just raise me after my parents died in that car accident when I was 12. She prepared me. She taught me how to read people, how to blend in anywhere, how to make others underestimate me. She taught me that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone ignores. Donovan Blackthorne was 30 years old, 6 feet tall with dark hair, and the kind of smile that made waitresses forget to charge him for extra drinks. He drove a Tesla, donated to children's charities, and never raised his voice. Everyone loved Donovan. He was the perfect gentleman, the kind of man who opened doors and remembered your coffee order and sent flowers for no reason. He was also the kind of man who laundered money through fake investment accounts, while his family trafficked human beings through their import business. His mother, Vivienne, ran the family with an iron fist, hidden inside Chanel gloves. She'd never worked a day in her life, but somehow managed a business empire worth hundreds of millions. She spoke 4 languages, held dinner parties for senators, and had never once smiled at me without calculation behind her eyes. Uncle Jasper was the family's problem solver. He was the one who made inconvenient people disappear. He was the one who arranged accidents. He was the one who killed my parents 16 years ago because they were getting too close to the truth. And in exactly 1 hour, they were all going to pay for it. The morning sunlight streaming through the bridal suite windows caught the diamonds in my tiara, sending little rainbows across the cream-colored walls. My wedding dress hung perfectly, every detail flawless. The makeup artist had left 20 minutes ago, declaring me ready for my close-up. Everyone kept telling me I looked radiant. They had no idea that the glow on my face wasn't from happiness. It was from anticipation. Because today wasn't just my wedding day. Today was the day I finally got justice for Antonio and Maria Romano. Today was the day the Blackthorne family learned that some small-town kindergarten teachers are more dangerous than they ever imagined. I checked my phone one last time. Detective Morrison's text was simple. All units in position. Recording device is live. Take them down, kid. 16 years of planning was about to pay off. The innocent little bride they thought they were about to eliminate was actually the daughter of an undercover FBI agent, raised by the strongest woman in Chicago, trained for this exact moment. They thought they were about to bury Celeste, the kindergarten teacher. They had no idea they were about to meet Celeste Romano, and that the Romano family never forgets. The door handle turned. Uncle Jasper walked in first, baseball bat in hand, that sick smile already spreading across his face. It was showtime. Let me take you back to how this all started, because none of this happened by accident. 2 years ago, I was living in what everyone thought was my childhood home in Kalispell, Montana. A tiny house with a white picket fence, flower boxes in the windows, and pictures of me growing up with my sweet grandmother Nora scattered across every surface. The perfect backstory for a small-town girl who dreamed of something bigger. The truth was, I'd been living there for exactly 6 months, preparing for the most important performance of my life. Every detail of that house was carefully crafted. The photo albums filled with pictures of a childhood that never happened. The teaching certificate I'd actually earned, because even deep cover requires real credentials. The church attendance records, the volunteer work at the animal shelter, the subscription to Better Homes and Gardens. I built Celeste the kindergarten teacher from the ground up, and she was perfect. When Donovan Blackthorne walked into Roosevelt Elementary for their annual charity presentation, I was ready for him. I'd studied everything about him for months. His favorite coffee was black with 2 sugars. He played tennis every Tuesday at the country club. He had a scar on his left hand from a sailing accident when he was 15. He liked women who seemed slightly overwhelmed by his attention, who blushed when he complimented them, who made him feel like the hero of every conversation. So that's exactly who I became. I spilled coffee on his Italian leather shoes and turned bright red, apologizing. I stumbled over my words when he asked me to dinner. I let him think he was rescuing me from my quiet little life, when really, I was walking him straight into the trap I'd been setting since I was 12 years old. The Blackthorne family had been American royalty for 4 generations. Edmund Blackthorne, Donovan's great-grandfather, had made his fortune in shipping during World War II. The family story was that he'd helped transport supplies to Allied forces. The reality was that he'd smuggled weapons, drugs, and eventually people, building an empire on human misery that his descendants had carefully maintained ever since. Their estate in the Hamptons was like something out of a movie. 40 acres of perfectly manicured lawns, gardens designed by the same team that worked on Central Park, and a house that had been featured in Architectural Digest 3 times. The main residence had 22 rooms, including a library with first-edition books that probably cost more than most people's cars. There was a tennis court, a swimming pool that could have hosted the Olympics, and a guest house that was bigger than the apartment I'd grown up in. But money couldn't wash the blood off their hands. Vivian Blackthorne was 62 years old and had perfected the art of being terrifying while looking elegant. She never raised her voice, never lost her composure, and never forgot a slight. She ran charity galas that raised millions for children's hospitals, while her family business destroyed children's lives. She spoke fluent French, Italian, and German, skills she'd learned to better manage their international operations. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down like I was something unpleasant she'd found on her shoe. "So, you're the little teacher who's captured our Donovan's attention." Her smile was winter cold. How refreshing to meet someone so genuine in this artificial world. I played my part perfectly, stammering my thanks for welcoming me into their home, complimenting her beautiful dress, asking nervous questions about proper etiquette at fancy dinner parties. She ate it up. Rich people love nothing more than someone who makes them feel superior. Uncle Jasper was different. Where Vivian was ice, he was fire barely contained. He had the kind of handshake that was just a little too firm, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He ran the family's import business from offices in Manhattan, but his real work happened in warehouses in Brooklyn, where shipping containers arrived from Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and Central America. He was also the one who'd arranged for my parents' car to lose its brakes on a rainy Chicago highway 16 years ago. For 2 years, I played the part of the grateful girlfriend, then fiancé. I attended their dinner parties and smiled politely while senators and judges kissed Vivian's ring. I went dress shopping with their daughters-in-law and pretended to be intimidated by the price tags. I let Donovan teach me about wine and art and all the cultural markers that separated their world from the one they thought I came from. And the entire time, I was gathering evidence. Every conversation was recorded. Every document I could photograph, I did. Every name dropped at dinner parties went into my reports. Every time Uncle Jasper disappeared for mysterious business trips, I tracked his movements. Every wire transfer Donovan made through his investment firm, I documented. But more than that, I was waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when the entire family would be together, relaxed and confident, believing they were untouchable. The moment when their arrogance would make them careless enough to reveal the truth about what happened to my parents. That moment was supposed to be my wedding day, the day I became family, the day they would finally trust me completely. Instead, it became the day they decided I knew too much to live. They had no idea I'd been counting on exactly that. The knock on the bridal suite door came at exactly 2:17 p.m. I knew the time because I'd been checking my phone obsessively, waiting for Detective Morrison's final status update. 300 guests were seated outside. The string quartet was playing Pachelbel's Canon. Everything was supposed to be perfect. "Come in," I called, expecting my wedding coordinator with some last-minute detail about the flower arrangements or the photographer's positioning. Instead, Vivian Blackthorne swept into the room like a storm front, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the August humidity. She wasn't wearing her mother-of-the-groom dress. She was wearing black slacks and a silk blouse, like she was dressed for business instead of a wedding. "Hello, darling," she said, but her voice had none of the forced warmth she usually managed around me. "We need to have a little chat." Uncle Jasper followed her through the doorway, and my stomach dropped. He was carrying a Louisville Slugger baseball bat, holding it casually like it was the most natural thing in the world. Behind him came Cousin Thaddeus, Donovan's prep school roommate, who'd been best man at 3 Blackthorne weddings. He had a bat, too. Then came 2 more men I recognized from family photos but had never actually met. Distant cousins, maybe, or family business associates. They all had bats. They were all smiling. "What's going on?" I asked, letting my voice shake exactly the right amount. Not too much fear, not too little. Just a confused bride wondering why her future in-laws had brought sports equipment to her wedding preparation. Vivian laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "Oh, sweet Celeste, did you really think we wouldn't figure it out?" She walked over to my vanity table where my purse sat open next to my makeup bag. Without asking permission, she dumped everything out onto the white marble surface. My wallet, keys, lip gloss, breath mints, and the small leather journal I carried everywhere scattered across the table. "Looking for something?" I asked, still playing innocent even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "We found your little apartment in Chicago, dear," Vivian said, flipping through my journal like she was reading a grocery list. "The one you thought we didn't know about, the one where you kept all those interesting photographs and documents." Uncle Jasper stepped closer, tapping the bat against his palm in a steady rhythm. Amazing what people leave lying around when they think they're being clever. Financial records, shipping manifests, names and dates going back 20 years. My mouth went dry. The Chicago apartment was my backup safe house, the place where I'd stored copies of everything in case something went wrong. I'd been so careful about security, about making sure no one could trace it back to me. But the Blackthorns had resources I'd underestimated. "I don't understand what you're talking about," I said, because that's what Celeste the kindergarten teacher would say. Confused, overwhelmed, completely out of her depth, Thaddeus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Come on, sweetheart. We know you hired that private investigator. Marcus Webb works out of a dingy office above a pizza place in Queens. He's been asking questions about our family business for 8 months now." "Questions about shipping routes," Jasper added, still tapping that bat. "Questions about warehouse locations. Questions about certain accidents that happened to certain people who got too curious about things that weren't their business." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They knew about Marcus. They knew about the investigation. But how much did they actually know about who I really was? "You see, darling," Vivian said, settling into the white velvet chair by the window like she was hosting a tea party. "We've been watching you much longer than you've been watching us. Did you really think you could infiltrate this family without us noticing?" She opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. "Celeste Romano, born in Chicago, not Montana, daughter of Antonio and Maria Romano, raised by grandmother Nora Romano after her parents died in what the police called a car accident." My blood turned to ice. They knew everything. "Here's what's going to happen," Uncle Jasper said, stepping close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something else. Something metallic that might have been blood. "You're going to have another tragic accident, just like your parents did." Poor little bride, overcome with nerves, decided to take a walk in the garden before the ceremony. Terrible fall down those stone steps near the rose bushes. Such a shame. "The guests will be so heartbroken," Vivian added with mock sympathy. "Donovan will be devastated, of course, but he'll recover. He always does." Thaddeus moved to block the door while the other 2 men positioned themselves by the windows. They'd done this before. This wasn't their first time cornering someone who knew too much about the Blackthorne family business. "Please," I whispered, letting tears fill my eyes. "I don't know what you think I've done, but I love Donovan. I just want to marry him." Uncle Jasper raised the bat and smiled. "Should have thought of that before you started digging into things that weren't your concern, little girl. Just like your daddy should have minded his own business instead of playing undercover copy." And there it was, the confession I'd been waiting 16 years to hear. They'd just admitted to murdering my parents. Now it was time to drop the act. The moment Uncle Jasper mentioned my father being an undercover cop, everything inside me went perfectly still. 16 years of preparation, 2 years of careful planning, and countless hours of pretending to be someone I wasn't had all led to this single moment. They'd just confessed to murder, and they had no idea I was recording every word. I stopped crying. I stopped shaking. I stood up from the vanity chair and looked directly at Vivienne Blackthorne with the kind of stare that would have made my grandmother Nora proud. "Thank you," I said, my voice completely steady now. "That's exactly what I needed to hear." The change in my posture, my voice, my entire presence made all 5 of them freeze. Uncle Jasper's bat stopped its rhythmic tapping. Thaddeus stepped back from the door. Even Vivian's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a second. "You see," I continued, reaching into my bra and pulling out a device no bigger than a quarter. "This little recorder has been running since the moment you walked through that door. Every threat, every confession, every detail about my parents' murder is now permanently documented." I held up the device so they could all see it clearly. Digital recording, cloud backup, automatically transmitted to 3 separate secure servers. Even if you destroy this, Detective Ray Morrison already has copies. Vivian shot to her feet. "You little bitch!" "Oh, we're dropping the polite act now?" "Good." I smiled, and it wasn't the sweet, nervous smile they were used to seeing from me. It was the smile of a woman who'd been planning this moment since she was 12 years old. Let me introduce myself properly. I'm Celeste Romano, daughter of FBI agent Antonio Romano and Detective Maria Romano. You killed them because my father was 3 weeks away from exposing your entire human trafficking operation. Uncle Jasper raised his bat, but I held up my hand. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Jasper. You see those catering staff members who've been serving champagne to your guests all morning? Half of them are FBI agents. The photographer who's been taking such beautiful pictures of the estate? Agent Sarah Chen, Organized Crime Task Force. That charming violinist in the string quartet, Detective Marcus Torres, Undercover Narcotics." I walked over to the window and gestured toward the perfectly arranged wedding scene below. 300 guests, including Federal Judge Patricia Williams, Judge Robert Chen, and Judge Maria Santos. All 3 of them have been briefed on your family's activities and are prepared to issue warrants the moment they receive word from Detective Morrison. Thaddeus tried to move toward the door, but I shook my head. "The hallways are covered too, cousin. Agent Jennifer Walsh is stationed as wedding security. Agent David Kim is working the front entrance as valet parking. Even the restroom attendant is NYPD Detective Lisa Ramirez." Vivian's face had gone white. "This is impossible. We investigated you for 2 years. We know everything about your background." "You know everything about Celeste, the kindergarten teacher," I corrected. "Sweet little girl from Montana who lost her parents in a car accident and was raised by her grandmother. That story was perfect because it had just enough truth to be believable. I did lose my parents. I was raised by my grandmother. But Antonio and Maria Romano weren't killed in any accident." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo I'd kept hidden for 16 years. "This is my father's final report on the Blackthorne family operation. Names, dates, shipping routes, financial records, everything. He'd been building a case against you for 3 years when you had him killed." Uncle Jasper's hands were shaking now. "How did you find us? How did you know?" My father was thorough. Before he died, he'd already identified Donovan as a key player in your money laundering operation. When I turned 18, Detective Morrison gave me access to all of my father's files. It took me 10 years to finish my training, establish my cover identity, and position myself to get close to your family. I walked over to the mirror and began removing the flowers from my hair, letting my careful bridal styling fall apart. Every date with Donovan was planned. Every family dinner where I played the nervous girlfriend was reconnaissance. Every time you condescended to me, every time you made me feel small and grateful, I was gathering evidence. The private investigator you found? Marcus Webb? He was a decoy. I hired him to ask obvious questions and leave a paper trail you'd eventually discover. I wanted you to think you'd caught me being sloppy. I wanted you to feel confident enough to make a move. I pulled off my engagement ring and set it on the vanity table. This ring belonged to your grandmother, didn't it, Vivian? The one who helped start the family business back in the 1940s? Don't worry, it'll make excellent evidence in the racketeering trial. Vivian lunged toward me, but I was ready for her. 2 years of letting this family treat me like dirt. 2 years of smiling and nodding while they bragged about their wealth built on human suffering. 2 years of sleeping next to a man whose hands were stained with blood. One more thing, I said, hitting speed dial on my phone. Detective Morrison, it's time. They just confessed to my parents' murder. The phone barely had time to ring before his voice came through crystal clear. Copy that, Celeste. All units move in. Blackthorn family is under arrest. Within seconds, the bridal suite door burst open, and FBI agents flooded the room, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Uncle Jasper dropped his bat and raised his hands. Thaddeus tried to run for the window but found Agent Chen blocking his path with her service weapon drawn. As they cuffed Vivian Blackthorn, she looked at me with pure hatred. You destroyed everything. I looked her straight in the eyes and said the words I'd been waiting 16 years to say. Number, I got justice. The sound of FBI agents storming through the Blackthorn estate was like thunder rolling across the perfectly manicured grounds. From my bridal suite window, I watched 300 wedding guests leap from their white chairs as armed federal agents emerged from behind rose bushes, fountain sculptures, and the elegant catering stations where they'd been serving champagne just moments before. Celeste Romano, FBI! Agent Chen shouted as she burst through the door, weapon drawn and pointed directly at Uncle Jasper's chest. Step away from the witness! But I wasn't done yet. 16 years of planning had led to this moment, and I wasn't about to let it end with simple arrests. These people had destroyed my family, built an empire on human misery, and thought they were untouchable. They deserved to know exactly how thoroughly they'd been outplayed. Wait, I said, holding up my hand as Agent Chen moved to cuff Vivian. They still don't understand what's happening here. Let me explain it to them. Detective Morrison's voice crackled through my earpiece. You have 2 minutes before we need to secure the scene. I turned to face Vivian, who was staring at me like she was seeing a ghost. In a way, she was. Do you want to know how long I've been planning this? It started the day Detective Morrison showed up at my grandmother's house and told me my parents weren't coming home. I was 12 years old, and I made him promise that someday we'd make you pay. Uncle Jasper tried to speak, but Agent Torres stepped forward and placed him in handcuffs. Jasper Blackthorn, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and human trafficking. My father spent 3 years documenting your operation, I continued, pulling a thick manila folder from my makeup case. Shipping manifests showing containers that arrived empty but left full of people. Financial records proving Donovan's investment firm was washing your blood money. Witness statements from survivors of your trafficking network. I threw the folder onto the vanity table, papers scattering everywhere. Every family dinner, every holiday celebration, every time you bragged about your business connections, I was recording you. The chandelier in your dining room? Bugged. The family study where you hold your private meetings? Cameras in 3 locations. Your private office, Vivian? I've been copying your files for 18 months. Thaddeus struggled against his restraints as Agent Walsh read him his rights. This is entrapment. This whole thing is illegal. Actually, it's not, Detective Morrison said, walking into the room with a satisfied smile. Celeste has been a registered FBI informant for 2 years. Every piece of evidence was gathered legally under federal authorization. Every recording, every photograph, every document was obtained with proper warrants. I looked directly at Vivian as Agent Chen secured her hands behind her back. You want to know the best part? Donovan really did fall in love with me. All those romantic dinners, all those late-night conversations about our future together, all those times he told me he wanted to protect me from his family's business. He meant every word. The door opened again, and they brought Donovan in wearing handcuffs, his wedding tuxedo wrinkled and his face pale with shock. When he saw me standing there in my wedding dress, surrounded by federal agents, his legs nearly gave out. "Celeste?" His voice cracked like a teenage boy's. "What's happening?" "They're saying you're FBI. They're saying this whole thing was fake." I walked over to him, close enough to see the confusion and betrayal in his eyes. "The investigation was real, Donovan. The evidence against your family was real. Your mother ordering my parents' deaths was real, but you want to know what else was real?" I reached up and touched his face gently, the way I had 1,000 times over the past 2 years. "I really did love you. I tried so hard not to because it would have made this easier, but I fell in love with the man you pretended to be." Tears started rolling down his cheeks. "Pretended to be?" "Agent Kim found the warehouse records in your office safe this morning," Detective Morrison said, consulting his notes. 17 different facilities used for human trafficking. Your signature is on transfer documents for over 300 victims in the past 5 years alone." I stepped back from Donovan, letting my hand fall away from his face. "You knew, didn't you? You've always known what your family was doing. You just told yourself it wasn't your responsibility because you only handled the money." He opened his mouth to deny it, but I pulled out my phone and played a recording from 6 months ago. His own voice filled the room. "As long as the transfers stay clean and the accounts balance, I don't ask questions about cargo manifests. That's Uncle Jasper's department." "Every romantic moment we shared," I said, watching his face crumble as he realized how completely he'd been exposed. "Every time you told me you loved me, every time you promised to take care of me forever. You knew your family was destroying people's lives. You knew, and you chose to profit from it anyway." Agent Chen placed her hand on Vivian's shoulder. "Vivian Blackthorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, racketeering, human trafficking, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." As they led the Blackthorne family away in handcuffs, Vivian turned back to me one last time. "You think you've won something? You think this changes anything?" I smiled and held up the engagement ring I'd removed from my finger. "This ring is evidence in a federal racketeering case. Your family's assets are being seized. Your business associates are being arrested in 12 different cities right now. And every person you've trafficked, every family you've destroyed, every life you've ruined will finally get justice." Detective Morrison put his arm around my shoulders as we watched the FBI vehicles drive away with their prisoners. "Your parents would be proud, kid." I looked out at the ruined wedding scene, the overturned chairs and scattered flowers, the guests being questioned by federal agents, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 16 years: peace. 3 months later, I stood in the federal courthouse in Manhattan, watching Judge Patricia Williams sentence the last member of the Blackthorne family. Vivian received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Uncle Jasper got the same. Thaddeus and the other cousins received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years. Donovan got 30 years for money laundering and conspiracy charges. When they read his sentence, he looked directly at me from across the courtroom. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that I felt no regret, no sadness, no lingering love for the man he'd turned out to be. The federal prosecutor, Janet Martinez, had called it the largest human trafficking bust in New York State history. Over 400 victims were identified and given assistance to rebuild their lives. 12 related operations in other states were shut down based on evidence from the Blackthorne files. The family's entire business empire, worth over $200 million, was seized and liquidated to fund victim compensation. Detective Morrison drove me to Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx afterward, the same cemetery where we'd buried my parents 16 years ago. I'd never been able to visit their real graves before because it would have blown my cover. For 16 years, I'd mourned them at fake grave sites, pretending to grieve people who died in car accidents instead of honoring FBI agents who died serving justice. "They would be so proud of you, Celeste." Detective Morrison said as we stood before the simple granite headstone that read, Antonio Romano, devoted father and FBI agent, and Maria Romano, loving mother and detective. I placed fresh flowers on their graves, white roses like the ones that had been scattered across the Blackthorn estate during the arrests. I kept my promise to them. Every single person responsible for their deaths is behind bars. The Blackthorn estate was sold at auction. A children's charity bought it for half its original value and turned it into a residential facility for survivors of human trafficking. The irony was perfect. The same grounds where the Blackthorns had celebrated their wealth, built on human suffering, now provided healing and hope for their victims. I kept one thing from that day. Not the engagement ring, which was in an evidence locker somewhere. Not any of the expensive gifts Donovan had given me over 2 years of fake courtship. I kept the small digital recorder that had captured their confessions. Detective Morrison had it mounted in a frame with a photo of my parents, and it sits on my desk at FBI headquarters, where I now work as a special agent in the organized crime unit. My first case was investigating a family in Boston with suspicious shipping connections. My second case involved a network in Miami that was flagged for the same kind of financial irregularities that had marked the Blackthorn operation. It turns out that growing up with a grandmother who taught me to read people, spending 2 years undercover in high society, and learning to hide my true self while gathering evidence are exactly the skills you need for this kind of work. The hardest part wasn't the danger or the long hours or the emotional weight of the cases. The hardest part was learning to be myself again after spending so long pretending to be someone else. Celeste, the kindergarten teacher, had been sweet, naive, easily impressed, grateful for any attention. The real Celeste Romano was harder, more cynical, quicker to anger, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting innocent people from predators. Detective Morrison became like a father to me, the way he'd been a partner to my real father. He taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the people who hurt others can never do it again. He taught me that going undercover means you have to be willing to sacrifice pieces of yourself to protect people who will never know your name or thank you for what you've done. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Donovan. It was the first of many. He wrote to me every week from federal prison, long letters full of apologies and explanations and promises that he'd changed. He wrote about the therapy sessions he was attending, the books he was reading, the man he claimed he was becoming. I never opened a single one. Detective Morrison suggested I might want to read them. That closure sometimes comes from understanding the person who hurt you. But I didn't need closure from Donovan Blackthorn. I'd gotten all the closure I needed watching him get sentenced for his crimes. Some stories don't end with forgiveness or reconciliation or the villain learning the error of their ways. Some stories end with justice being served and the good guys winning, period. Some people don't deserve second chances, especially when their choices destroyed hundreds of lives. The truth is, I sleep better at night knowing that every member of the Blackthorn family is locked away where they can never hurt anyone again. I sleep better knowing that my parents' deaths weren't meaningless, that their sacrifice led to justice not just for our family, but for every person who suffered because of Blackthorn greed. People always say that revenge is a dish, best served cold, but this wasn't revenge. This was justice served exactly the right temperature, after 16 years of careful preparation. This was a daughter honoring her parents' memory by finishing the work they died trying to complete. And you know what? It was worth every minute of those 2 years pretending to be someone I wasn't. It was worth every fake smile, every staged moment of vulnerability. Every night I went to sleep next to a man whose hands were stained with blood. It was worth it because 400 people are free, because other families won't lose their children to human traffickers, and because Antonio and Maria Romano's work finally got the ending it deserved. The Romano family never forgets, and we never give up. Some lessons are worth waiting 16 years to teach. That's my story. Justice isn't always pretty, and it's not always quick, but when it finally comes, it's beautiful. If this story moved you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think about long-term justice versus immediate revenge. Have you ever had to wait years to see someone face consequences for their actions? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories of justice, survival, and people who refused to give up when everyone counted them out. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates.